So welcome, Dwight.
Thank you very much. I will remain seated while speaking. The global situation has been described by all the speakers quite comprehensively. I just want to make one or two extra points that whereas shortly after the end of the Cold War, it seemed there was a monopoly of power in global dominance by the United States, this is no longer the case. This has given way to a situation of competitive rivalries of a range of powers, America, Russia, China, India, and the EU, all jostling for power, with regional powers like Iran, Turkey, Brazil, Nigeria, South Africa, also very important. Both Putin and Trump are asserting policies of make Russia stroke America great again, but America particularly is in a state of relative decline. Countries in decline become dangerous to their neighbours, and America is in decline notably compared with the rising economic power of China. China is the world's global economic superpower and will overtake the American economy within a few years. How America reacts to this is going to be critical for the future. We've been told that ISIS has been defeated militarily in the Middle East, but is now going underground to menace Western Europe. And with its affiliates, and with Al-Qaeda, and with Boko Haram in West Africa, and Al-Shabaab in East Africa, these are misuses of Islamic religion for power and for influence, partly as a reaction against Western interventionism. The misuse of religion, I stress the word misuse of religion, is an ongoing challenge. It has emerged or re-emerged as a key factor in global politics since the 1970s, but is particularly transformative in the 21st century. Now, all these groups I've referred to and the various local affiliates, Islam, are all impelled by visions of extreme Islamist political hegemony, geographically from North Africa to Afghanistan, even in some versions embracing Indonesia and the Philippines. Their ideological roots are in the Muslim Brotherhood in the 1940s and the Islamism of the radical Egyptian theorist Sayyid Qutb, who's been called the Karl Marx of the Arab world. They appeal to marginalised, the poor, the alienated, and particularly the alienated middle-class elements in a number of countries, because right across those areas there's a very large number of young, uneducated and unemployed men, currently, for example, driving the revolution in Algeria. Another factor also driving these misuse of religion ideologies is the dysfunction of global neoliberal capitalism, causing huge and quite unprecedented inequality. Now this system, it must be faced, this system has indeed lifted millions of poverty out of poverty in China and East Asia. But the side effect is the huge inequality which has resulted. Trump is quite right to say that the creation of the Chinese middle class is at the expense of the American working and lower middle class. That was something he grasped which Hillary Clinton did not grasp. One reason for his being elected. China had 150 billionaires. Peter Mandelson was once famously asked, what do you think about millionaires? He said, I'm quite relaxed about people becoming millionaires. We don't know what he might think about people becoming billionaires. And Paul Rogers of Bradford, referred to by Vijay earlier in this event, said, wealth buys influence but leads to mass resentment and anger. And Paul Rogers' view is that terrorism, community violence and wars with non-state groups will persist, while this gross inequality also persists. Muslim jihadism is the major current threat, but, quote, the misuse of faith or violence by extremists is a danger in all world religions. Again, a quote from Paul Rogers. You see Hindu violence against other faiths in India, and the Buddhist violence or in Myanmar against the Rohingya Muslims. Very, very sadly, that violence by Buddhists in Myanmar and previous Buddhist violence in Sri Lanka has destroyed the previous erstwhile view that Buddhism also always equals peace and non-violence. Now, if one thinks the Middle East, the critical place of the Israeli-Palestine dispute, conflict, etc., is not fully understood in the West. Now, originally this was primarily a dispute over territory, then it's become a dispute about Israel's human rights abuses against the Palestinians. But in recent years, this was originally a secular dispute, because Israel is not, by law, entirely a religious state. That's still disputed. What was a secular dispute has become increasingly charged with religious sentiment. The controversy over the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the increasing self-identification in Israel as a Jewish state in religious as well as racial and cultural terms, and the marginalization of the Israeli Arabs, and the Israeli settlers doing land grabs against the Palestinians and justifying this on Old Testament era history. These are all examples of the misuse of religion in the Israel-Palestine situation. And religious extremism is hindering solutions. In America, we've got this very, very powerful Christian Zionist lobby with millennial beliefs who back Trump's pro-Israel lobby. I don't like to comment on somebody else's soul, but I'm not quite sure that Trump is terribly a man of faith. And certainly he has a very strongly pro-Israel policy, with the latest policy towards the recognition of the Golan Heights as part of the territory of Israel. And of course, this is backed by the Christian Zionists and fundamentalist pro-Israel groups in America, and this really hinders a solution to the problem. I mean, these groups, some of these groups believe that the Jewish temple must be rebuilt, because this will hasten the second coming of Christ to that part of the world. And in Israel, the extreme Zionists urge the expulsion of all Palestinians to the east of Jordan. Now, in the case of Islam, the violent extremism did not begin with 9/11. That's a misconception. Though that catalysm made the world wake up to it. It really began with the 1979 Iranian Revolution under Ayatollah Khomeini and his proclamation of global Islamic extremism. There were strong reverberations from that felt in the Balkan and Caucasus wars in the 1980s and 1990s. I remember being told by a member of the Croatian parliament that there were nightly flights from Tehran to Zagreb, bringing in weapons and also Muslim fighters to fight on the Catholic side against the Orthodox in the Yugoslavian war. So this shows you that religion was a factor in that war, though not fully grasped at the time. Now, with the collapse of communism had many, many resonances and consequences far beyond Eastern Europe. And the secular regimes in the Middle East also became discredited, and faith moved in for good and bad to fill this psychological and political vacuum. Now, there is a very, very positive side to this. Islam, like other religions, is having a genuine spiritual revival with many positive features, including social welfare programs. But most Muslims are not concerned about radical Islam. They're not concerned about it, they're not involved in it, they don't support radical Islam or violence. These are minority issues. So there's a genuine spiritual revival within which there are these negative forces. Because this Islamist revival is part of a worldwide resurgence of religious belief, religious practice and allegiance. I looked up the figures. Christianity has 2.3 billion adherents. Islam 1.8 billion, the 1.1 billion Hindu adherents, Buddhism has 500 million, and there are 10 million Jews, and some 40 million adherents of pagan and folk religions. Now, many of these people are nominally religious, that's not very active, but for many of them, religion helps to define their personal identity. And generally, all these faiths are enjoying a global resurgence. Now, we live in a country and half a continent where this is not happening. Only Western Europe, impacted by secularism, scientism, agnosticism, and anti-faith bias in the media, only Western Europe is rejecting its 2,000-year-old Christian heritage. Now, legalizing same-sex marriage, when we think about it, which is contrary to age-old Christian teaching, was a very clear example of this rejection of the Christian heritage. But worldwide, Christianity is flourishing, as is Islam. In China, in sub-Saharan Africa, in post-communist Eastern Europe, Latin America and Korea, Christianity is strong, getting stronger. Christianity alone has a world-recognized leader, the Pope, who can speak on international issues. And it must be said that the Vatican does work tirelessly behind the scenes to end conflicts in various parts of the world, and certainly to try and bring peace to the Middle East. Now, post-communist Eastern Europe is mostly seeing a great revival of faith. Whether you think of Catholic Holland, where the church is strongly aligned with the Conservative Law and Justice Party, or the huge revival of Eastern Orthodoxy in Russia. Now, this is very underreported in our country, but the Russian Orthodox Church is enjoying an astonishing revival. It was very popular a couple of years ago. The Patriarch Kirill came to visit Her Majesty the Queen in her capacity as head of the Church of England. And this revival of orthodoxy in Russia is symbolized by the rebuilding of the massive Cathedral of Christ the Saviour in central Moscow, which Stalin had blown up, hoping it could be replaced by a great temple of communism, but that didn't quite work out. It became a swimming pool instead. So the swimming pool was replaced by a new cathedral. Now, in Russia particularly, the reaffirming of orthodoxy as the essential heritage of Russia is a central theme of the post-Soviet revival. Moral, cultural, religious and political, and very much linked to patriotic pride. It was very typical that, I think it was last year, Putin and the head of the Orthodox Church together unveiled a gigantic statue in Moscow of Prince Saint Vladimir, who in 988 established the church, became a Christian, became a Christian, and this was the foundation of the Russian state, which later moved to northern Russia. And this was Putin himself, a dedicated Orthodox believer. I mean, it's interesting, people don't know this, but how many Western leaders, if they go to another country on a state visit, spend 3 days at a religious shrine? And when Putin went to Greece on a state visit, he said, I want 3 days to spend on Mount Athos, meeting the Orthodox, meeting with monks. So don't misunderstand Putin, he's a man of many parts. Now, resurgent Christianity has many varied political and social expressions. In Africa, the churches very much promote welfare programs, which are very weak in most African states. They're very keen to broker peace processes, whether in Rwanda or any other conflict situations, and often have stood up very, very courageously against African dictators. However, in Eastern Europe, the Catholics generally support right-wing parties which we would find rather unacceptable. But they do this because these right-wing parties both uphold traditional family values as against the current trendy genderist agendas, but they also provide welfare for the poor. It's quite significant in Poland, which had a neoliberal government for years until the pro-Catholic party won the polls. There were no allowances for children. It was the ultra-conservative, pro-Catholic party currently in power, Law and Justice, which for the first time brought in family allowances for everybody and particularly targeted welfare for poor people. This, of course, is in line with the Catholic agenda. So you have, in a number of countries, forces of social conservatism and political conservatism at the same time providing generous welfare to poor families. That also happened in Turkey with the rise of Erdogan. Now, the current global political situation is one of widespread instability, clashes of cultures. I mean, quite a few people in many parts of the world would challenge the idea, which you mentioned, dear friend, of the universalization of human rights. Now, of course, the UN Charter, well, that has a Declaration of Human Rights, but that was created at a time when the UN was limited to a range of countries. It wasn't the whole world it is today. There's a very big debate about whether human rights are, whether all human rights defined in Western terms really are applicable universally. That is contested. It was contested at least 10 years ago by the government of Malaysia, particularly around religious and cultural issues. There are those who say these human rights are culturally rooted. And that debate has not yet gone away. One extreme example is that the strongly kind of ultra right-wing government now elected in Brazil under President Bolsonaro was backed not by the Catholics, because they didn't like his views on human rights, but because backed by the Pentecostalists who become very strong. But there's a Pentecostalist lady who's the Ministry of Health in the Brazil government. Why? Because of Bolsonaro's strong anti-gay attitudes. The Pentecostalist churches don't sympathise with the gay agenda, so they pulled out their members in support of Bolsonaro. So there are many, many complexities here. Now, in this volatile global situation, religion and misuse of religion can either be a force for exacerbating divisions and inciting violence, or for building bridges, nurturing harmony, engaging in community and global peace. A bad example, which has already been flagged up, of the misuse of religion, the manipulative misuse of religion by a powerful leader, is that of Modi of India, who is a populist Hindu nationalist. He appeals to the poor masses by playing on fervent Hindu devotion and popular nationalism with promises of greatness. Again, the agenda is make India great again. When wasn't India great? Mm-hmm. Now, these perversions of faith, I'd like it to continue as long as, first of all, the neo-globalized capitalism is producing gross equality and alienation, and there are authoritarian leaders around who are playing it. But there are many, many positives in the global religious situation. If you think of the work of the international aid agencies, Christian aid, a range of other Christian agencies, and also if you think of Islamic Relief and other Muslim relief agencies, doing vast amounts of development aid, humanitarian aid all around the world. And the African churches are very active in post-conflict reconstruction and reconciliation. Think of the role the churches played in church groups in Northern Ireland in building bridges between Catholics and Protestants as a basis for the Northern Ireland peace process. If you look at Israel, now one is always on negative about the Netanyahu, rightly so, but there are over 200, I found out, for 200 local Christian, Jewish and Muslim groups, Christians, Jews and Muslims coming together to build community peace and community harmony in Israel. So there's many of them. If you think of Russia, Russia has a special council of religions, and this brings together the Orthodox, the Protestants, the Muslims, the Buddhists, the Jews, and they work together for religious harmony in that very multicultural and multi-faith states. And our friend from Azerbaijan will probably know far more than myself about the great events in Astana to build peace by interfaith action, interfaith harmony across that part of the world. So finally I would say perhaps the best thing that world faiths can do for peace, and especially Christians and Muslims as world communities, is to help spread global awareness and global moral responsibility, and a sense of global compassion for the whole human community, and to see the world as a human family for which all faiths are responsible, and people of another faith are also equally responsible, and to build that kind of cooperative family sense. People of faith would say it's one family under God, but they would say it's one family whether you bring in God or not. And I think this is the message which the world faiths at their best would want to bring. A message of global compassion, global unity and global peace. Thank you very much.